All right, Sandra, let's dig deeper on this. Let's bring in Dan Cannon, former Battleground State Director for the Harris-Walz campaign, and Jessica Anderson, former Associate Director of OMB under President Trump. So the Biden decline now being talked about as potentially a bigger scandal than Watergate. But Watergate happened in the shadows, behind closed doors. This was happening right in front of us all, Dan, for the entire world to see. And yet the White House press corps, rather than doing what Woodward and Bernstein did, as we mentioned last hour, just accepted whatever was spoon-fed to it from Biden.
Well, look, John, I think the fact that this campaign was out in the open is very, very important for folks to remember. And I want to make a point from my personal experience.
No, I'm saying the decline was out in the open, and nobody bought it.
But let me make this point from personal experience. This idea that Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson are putting together, that there was this small group, this Politburo, as they call it, this shepherding the president around from room to room, is just not factually true. And everyone understands that because they saw the campaign. I worked for Mike Bloomberg in 2020. I worked for Mike Bloomberg in that primary because I did not think Joe Biden could win the election, but I went on to join the Biden campaign late in the day. If you wanted to have some small group of folks shield the president, you wouldn't put me on the plane with him, and I was on the plane with him, with Bruce Reed and others in that prep. So I disagree with a lot of what the book says. But to your point, the Biden you saw in the debate or at events, at rallies, on rope lines, and let's not forget, the Biden campaign pushed the Trump campaign to have that early debate. If there was some scandal and some cover-up, we wouldn't be pushing for an earlier debate. We thought we could win that debate. Now, we were obviously very wrong, but from the perspective of what we were trying to do with the American people, there was nothing to hide there, and there was no scandal behind the scenes.
Yes, I mean, I've always thought that the debate was pushed early so that if Biden flamed out, you'd have time to replace it. Because if the debate went ahead in late September, that would have been it. In terms of this Politburo, you say doesn't exist, the authors of the book do. This is the alleged Politburo: Mike Donilon, Steve Ricchetti, Bruce Reed, Ron Klain, Jill Biden, and Hunter Biden. Here's what Guy Benson said about that. Listen here.
You had basically in private, in secret, a small group of unelected people running the executive branch. That is not allowed under the Constitution, and that is a genuine, serious scandal.
So whether or not there was an actual, quote, Politburo comprised of those people, it would appear that behind the scenes, other people than Joe Biden were running the government, at least at times. Liberal use of the auto pen. And the question is that allowed under the Constitution?
Well, I think that's exactly what the investigations in Congress are going to need to point out. And the implications of this decline, whether or not there were people that were representing the president's interests or the president was fully functional, which, I mean, we saw the videos. He was not, at least the last 10 months before the election, is look at all of the policy implications. You all the way going back to the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, to ill-advised prisoner swaps, to how he handled the border, to the economy. All of these policy implications are frankly at stake and should be scrutinized, because who was behind these decisions? Was it Joe Biden? Was it the advisors? Was it Jill Biden? I mean, you saw her taking pictures behind the Oval Office, on the president's desk on Air Force One, quickly jotting things down. Well, what was she actually doing? So these are the sort of questions I think Congress is going to have to investigate. They're right to do it. The only thing I would say about the book is that it's a little hypocritical for Jake Tapper at this point in his career to have rather been blowing the whistle a year ago. He was collecting stories and writing them in his diary so he could publish a tell-all. That's the hypocrisy here, too, John.
So you're sort of on the common ground with Jon Stewart, who said it's called the news. You're supposed to report it when you find out about it, not wait for a book. I want to jump to Rahm Emanuel, because he had a pretty harsh assessment of the Democratic Party. This, according to the Wall Street Journal. Rahm Emanuel, teasing a White House bid, says Democratic brand is weak. The former Congressman, White House Chief of Staff, Chicago mayor, and diplomat is direct about what he thinks Democrats need to do to win national elections again. He calls the party's brand, quote, toxic and weak and woke, a nod to culture war issues he thinks Democrats have become too often fixated on that President Trump has successfully used against them. Does the Democratic Party need a top-down restructuring of not just the messaging, but the actual policies that they're pursuing?
Well, perhaps, John, but I want to quibble with the policy restructuring a little bit. I think it's more about the emphasis on the policies. It's not clear to the American people that we're fighting for them in their everyday lives. We get stuck in issues partly because I think we can't help it sometimes. And there's an article in the New York Times today that we talked about earlier that has this notion of the moralizing, the kind of patronizing, preachy version of the Democratic Party on all sorts of issues, not just how the government should function, but how you should live your lives. That version of us is not very popular. That's got to change, and we have to get back to basics and talking about what really affects everyday Americans every day. There also needs to be a brand reset in the sense of the candidates that we have, who can communicate effectively, how can they cut through, do they have the confidence to inspire that sort of leadership following ability that they can have in the campaign. That's not been present for a little bit. I think that the opportunity to turn the page in 2028 is there. And by the way, Republicans are going to have to turn the page to some extent as well, because this will be a first election without Trump on the ballot in 12 years for president. It's going to look very different across the board.
They do have their own challenges, but so far, in terms of the Democrats and messaging and policy, the loudest voices in the room are the ones who want to double down on the policies that people say lost in the election last November.
Look at David Hogg's leadership. I mean, he's the vice chair of the
He thinks
DNC.
Jasmine Crockett is your most powerful spokesperson.
Yeah, and they're coming out with these new ideas to go after men, to change the messaging. Well, I would just say it's really difficult to go after a voting bloc in this country that you have villainized and called toxic and the patriarchy for the last decade. Now, all of a sudden, they're going to trust you. So I think the Democratic Party not just needs to have a policy reframe, but it needs some soul searching, John. What do they actually stand for? Are they supportive of the family, hardworking jobs, meritocracy, actually encouraging people to work hard, save an income, go forward with the American dream? That's not the Democratic Party that we see today. It's why the Republican parties, I think, have captured the working class vote for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, when Barack and Michelle Obama were vilifying black men in America for not voting for Kamala.
No way to get their vote.
Can I just say the segmentation problem in politics, whether it's on the right or left, that is a problem. Putting people into camps, not a broad approach, that is an issue.
Yeah, well, that's the way most of the country's going these days, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
Dan,
very
Jessica,
much so.
Great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, John.
So what do you think, Sandra?